Beyond that, let's talk about the specific policies that we've been discussing amongst, well, here in the House, legislation that's been introduced, the specific policies that will bring back the American manufacturing sector, because indeed it was specific laws that have been written here over the years that were largely, in my view, responsible for those outsourcing of jobs. An interesting word, outsourcing. Until December of 2010, an American corporation could receive a tax cut for every job they outsourced. That's largely over. There's a little bit more to be done, but most of those tax breaks have been eliminated by a law that was passed by the Democrats. Not one Republican voted for it, eliminating the tax break for the outsourcing of American jobs. The President said it so very well in his State of the Union. He said, we should not reward companies for sending jobs overseas. We should reward them for bringing those companies back, or those jobs back to the United States. And that can be done by some of the policies that we're talking about. The President signed a bill authored by Democrats, voted on by all Democrats and a few Republicans, that actually encourage that by giving companies a 100% immediate expensing of all capital equipment that they would invest in the United States. There's two examples, and I know you've got some that you've been interested in that you're actually authoring. You may want to talk about those. And we'll come back and talk about the specific things that we could do.
Well, absolutely. I think what my response to some of those changes that you just shared is that it creates this sea change. It creates the U-turn in the road, if you will, and it gets everyone's attention. And people understand that now we're operating under a different set of principles. You need to invest in America, invest in her workforce, and in the job opportunities that will follow. That's what it basically says. And when you look at machine tool operations and activity, and look at that over the last, again, decade or so, you will find that in both categories, Representative Garamendi, you find in both categories of consumption and production of machine tools, we're not in the top three. That ought to be a flag that goes up that draws our attention and would hopefully express a dire sense of urgency. And when you see Japan and China and Germany not only producing the machine tools, they're also consuming. So it tells you where the activity is, and it's robust. And that's all a matter of policy. Those are intentional outcomes that were driven by a very focused agenda in these nations. I applaud the President for setting the tone in his recent State of the Union message. I applaud the leadership in this House that is coming under the banner of the Democratic leadership that has engaged in Make It in America as our mantra, and reigniting our American dream is within our grasp if we begin to advocate a stand that brings back a robust quality to manufacturing opportunities.
I'll take another example of how policy can change what's happened. For a long, long time, we would send our tax dollars overseas to buy buses, rail cars, light rail, ferry boats, and the like. Every one of us that buys gasoline or diesel fuel pays a federal tax on that, 18.5 cents for gasoline and 25 cents for diesel fuel. That money is used to build transportation systems, roads, bridges, and the like. And where does it go? The Buy American laws were largely ignored. However, in the American Recovery Act, the stimulus bill, money was provided for additional purchase of rail cars, buses, and ferry boats. Somehow, wisely, the Democrats who authored the bill put in a clause that said that money could only be used to buy American-made equipment. And so what happened in Sacramento, California, Siemens, the large German manufacturing company decided that they would like to have some of that stimulus money. They wanted to build streetcars, light rail systems. So they opened and expanded their manufacturing plant in Sacramento to manufacture the streetcars for Austin, Texas, and San Diego, made in America because of a law that was passed. A prime example of what can be done when we pass the right law that says our tax money must be used to buy American-made equipment.
You know,
Tonko.
I agree that those are great incentives. If we can provide for employment-linked investments in R&D, in tax credits, that's a feather in the cap. That is a catalyst that draws a great response and great reaction. Your indications here of procurement in regard to Buy America is very important as one of the cornerstones of our agenda. But also, I think we need to focus on the investments in infrastructure and energy, and the investments in a different order of infrastructure, the human capital, the human infrastructure, making certain that we move forward with the training and retraining of the American worker, advancing higher education, certainly looking at pre-K through 12, and providing the career path opportunities. Now, I mentioned that because the employment-linked investments in R&D, bringing back R&D here, because where R&D is, where research is where manufacturing follows. So I mentioned that, but I use the real-life example of Wynn Kintz, and I've mentioned this before on the floor, but it's a recent example. It's worth repeating. Wynn Kintz of Kintz Plastics in Schoharie County in the 21st Congressional District in New York State.
Who represents that district?
Oh, I think it's
Tonko?
Paul Tonko.
Paul Tonko.
But I use that as an example because in order for Kintz Plastics to compete effectively in a global market, they needed to move to an automated portion of their assembly operations. They worked with the local higher ed infrastructure. And we have the partnerships in this country that have existed for a long time. There's this intellectual exchange of creative genius coming from the campuses, working with private sector, public sector. It happens. It happens to a great degree. And while they developed this automated assembly process for his industry, they also needed to train the workers on this new equipment so that it brought with it an employment link. And did that through one of the local community colleges, did an RPI automation design, and then did a Hudson Valley Community College-driven training process so that you brought about the workers you needed. Now, these are the investments that then produce these very tangible results and very lucrative dividends that enable us to prosper. And that's just one small example. And I see it over and over again in the 21st Congressional District. We're a hub of innovation jobs that are coming, green-collar, high-tech jobs, clean energy jobs. That's happening because there is a partnership with government, a partnership where government assumes some of the risk, or assumed, as we do with ARPA-E, an Energy Department of Energy program that's advanced research project monies. They expedite some of the idea innovation concepts, move them along in much quicker stead so that we can develop the jobs associated with that. So it's an investment. When you talk about the toolkit here, it's an investment in employment-linked R&D and tax credits, and it's an investment in procurement procedures that link themselves with Buy America, and then it's the work investing in infrastructure of routine kind, wiring communities, wiring the businesses, making certain that our roads, bridges, rail are state-of-the-art, and then the human infrastructure, creating programs that train, retrain, educate workers of the future. You need that in a cutting-edge fashion where we can maintain world leadership. It takes investment. Other nations have shown us that